How you doing, everybody? Greetings and welcome to 8 Bits in the Basement. So you find me here today in front of my Vic 20. I've been using an awful lot of the Vic and the C64 lately, and the reason for it is that I got in the post for myself this guy here. This is an SD to IEC device, and what it does is it emulates Commodore 1541 disk drive, or actually any Commodore disk drive, and it'll let you load disk images onto your Vic 20 or C64. And I got it because it saves me having to pull out that big hulking gargantuan 1541 disk drive that I have in the other end of the basement anytime that I want to use disk-based software on either of the machines. Now it works away really well and I am very satisfied with it, but I ran into one problem on the Vic. You may remember I made a video about this guy here a little while back. It's a 40 kilobyte memory expansion for the Vic 20, and it lets you play games and stuff that need extra memory, so some of the newer games and whatnot, but also what it'll let you do is load cartridges onto the 8 kilobytes of static memory it has here and let you run them as if they were cartridges. And this is really, really good. But there are one or two particular types of cartridge that require you to reset the Vic 20 after it's loaded up in order to get it to work. And I had a little workaround when I was using the 1541 disk drive, the real one. But this guy threw a curveball at me that I wasn't expecting at all. I'll just remind you of the way it worked for me before. Generally speaking, with these little expansion cards here, if we power cycle, it'll wipe the static RAM, so we end up back to square one and not being able to play the game. However, this particular card that I have in here, be it by happy accident or by design, when I power cycle the system, if it's only for a second or so, it can manage to retain what it has in its static memory and make the game work. Now, so all that worked really, really well with the real 1541 disk drive. But what I'm after doing here is I'm after powering up my Vic 20. I've got my SD to IEC card plugged in, and I've also got my memory expansion plugged in, and that's why we've got a load of extra bytes free here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up the file browser for the SD to IEC, navigate to my Moon Patrol files, and we'll load it up and see what it does. Okay, so Moon Patrol has loaded up. We're at that screen there where it's all loaded up. It's tried to run. It can't. It needs to be reset in order to work. So we'll do exactly what we did last time and see what happens with the SD to IEC device. Power down, power up, and we're back to the prompt here. So what has happened is the program that was loaded onto the static RAM in the expansion card has been completely wiped. And the reason for it, I'm pretty sure at this stage, is that before I was saying the reason it worked with the 1541 real disk drive was that it was loaded in, and when I powered down and powered back on, there was enough energy or power left in the capacitors inside in the Vic 20 to keep the static RAM alive, to keep the information in memory. So when I powered down and powered back up, the computer reset, but that information was available and it started the game working like a cartridge being inserted. What's happening this time though is that the SD to IEC device is plugged in, and when I power down, that straight away sucks all the power from the capacitors, and there is none left to keep the static RAM alive inside in the memory expansion. So we end up with pretty much an entire system reset. So the only way to get these particular cartridge programs to work with the Vic 20 is to install a reset switch. So how are we going to install a reset button on our Commodore Vic 20 here? Well, it's actually a lot easier than you might think. What we're going to do is we're going to exploit the reset pin on the processor inside in the Vic. Now, almost any processor there is has a reset pin on it, and the reason for it is quite simple. When you start up a computer, the processor behaves erratically. It goes kind of mental, and it needs to be reset in order for it to start working properly. And you see it in the likes of the ZX Spectrum. There's a little circuit built in that is specifically there in order to reset the processor as soon as it's powered on to get it working properly. Now, we're lucky with the Vic 20 here. The C64 is somewhat the same. We've got that reset pin, which is brought out to both the expansion port and the IDC port. So what I'll do is I'll just put a pin out of the IDC port right up here, and you'll see that pin 2 is ground and pin 6 is reset. So all we have to do is short pin 2 to pin 6 and we get a system reset. Now it's exactly the same thing for the expansion port, but the difference on the expansion port is, well, first of all, it looks a lot more complicated. There's 44 pins on it. Pin X is the reset line, but we've got 4 ground lines. Pin 1, pin 22, pin A and pin Z. They are all ground, so all we have to do is hold pin X to any one of those 4 and it should initialize a system reset as well. So what I'll do is I'll get set up here and I'll show you in practice it working quite quickly on the IDC line, and then what we'll do is we'll install a button on the memory expansion and see if that works too. Now, so what I'm after doing is I'm after flipping my VIC-20 back around the other way so that you can see what's going on the back of it here. And I'm after loading up Moon Patrol, and we're at the point where I would usually power cycle in order to get it to work. But you'll see here on the SD to IEC card that I have, the actual IEC port pins are exposed on the back side. So it makes it very, very easy for me to short pins together to see if I can reset. So we had a little look at the pin out. We saw that pin 6 is the reset and pin 2 is ground. And really what should happen if I short pin 6 to pin 2 is it should reset the system and Moon Patrol should start up for us. So we'll see if that works with this little metal screwdriver. I will short pin 2 to pin 6. Maybe if I did it properly, pin 2 to pin 6. And there we go. Moon Patrol is after starting up for us. So that has worked. Yeah, and it's working away fine. So yeah, that's basically how you could install a reset button on your SD to IEC device. You would just put the button that when it was pressed would short pin 2 to pin 6 on the IEC port, and you would have a system reset, and that would work away fine for you like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to have a little look at the other option of installing it onto the expansion card, and I'll tell you why I would prefer personally to put the reset button on the expansion card rather than on the SD to IEC device. Now, so putting a reset button onto the memory expansion card isn't actually as hard as you might think. All you need is a button and a couple of pieces of wire. And what I did to begin with was I snipped off the terminals that I had on that button so that there wouldn't be any like stray pieces of wire or metal that could short against anything. And I just thinned 2 of them. And then I soldered the pieces of wire onto those. So what I ended up with was a button with 2 pieces of wire hanging out of it. Really, the whole idea behind this is that when the button is pressed, reset on the board is joined to ground, and that'll initiate a reset. So what we want to do is we want to find the ground point on the board, and we also want to find the reset line on the board. So the easiest way to find the reset one is turn the board over so that the fingers are facing towards you, and also you're looking at the solder side of the board where all the pins are soldered in place. And the 3rd pin from the right is pin X. That's your reset point. So we're going to be bringing 1 wire to there. And any ground point on the board will do. So I decided the easiest way to tap into ground was the chip that was nearest to pin X. I tap into the ground pin on that. So then I wanted to glue that button to the board, but I had problems here. I tried for a while and the super glue just would not hold. And that's where I discovered that solder mask is not only good to prevent solder sticking to a board, but it's also good to prevent super glue sticking to a board. So what I did was I scraped off the solder mask in the top right hand corner of the solder side, because when the card is inserted that's out of the way, and I super glued directly to the copper on the ground plane. And it stuck really, really well. So I was happy with that. And then what I did was I tapped in the other wires. First of all, the ground wire into the pin where I wanted it to go to. And secondly, I tapped in to the finger, the reset finger on the board. Now, looking at the board, you'll see where it pushes into the Vic, or where it was in the Vic before, you'll see that the fingers are marked where the Vic, actually the connector clamps onto them. So I don't want to put a blob of solder there that'll be putting strain on the connector. So just above where the finger is sticking out of the connector, I put a little blob of solder. And then I just cut my wire to size, stripped it back a bit, and just soldered it in place. And that's it. That is the mod done. So what we'll do is we'll stick it into the Vic, take a look and see, does it actually work? Okay, so I'm after loading up Moon Patrol. It's ready to be reset. Here's my memory expansion plugged in the back, and here is the little button that I've installed into it. So when I press that button, this here should start Moon Patrol. And there we go. So that works. That works a treat. Righto, so my memory expansion now has a reset button on it. So the reason I wanted to put it on the memory expansion and not actually on the SD-TIE-C card is that the SD-TIE-C card is the thing that is draining the capacitors and stopping it from working the way that it worked when I just had the 1541 real disk drive, which is fine. But this way, even if I'm not using the SD-TIE-C, if I'm using, for example, my data cassette to load up cartridge files or whatever, I can reset still, because I think the data set will do exactly the same thing. It'll suck power out of the capacitors and mean that I need to reset like with a button instead of powering on and powering off. So that's the reason why I installed my reset button on the memory expansion card. But there you go, that's that. So the video is pretty much at an end. As always, if you enjoyed it, leave an old comment, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, give us a thumbs down, leave a comment as well, tell us why you didn't. But yeah, here we go. How about an old Star Wars joke for you this time? Here's one for you. So tell me, why did Princess Leia wear her hair tied up in buns? Because she didn't want it to hang so low. Yeah, you should subscribe if you want more of those. I've got tons and tons. Subscribe. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.